As 2024 draws to a close, here at the stream, we decided to take stock of the year that was. Among the highlights of our coverage were the times young people made headlines, advocating for causes that matter to them and holding those in power to account. I'm Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream. Throughout the past year, we saw young people engaging in different forms of protests that have had a significant impact on the realities they've been trying to change. In the US, college students started anti-war encampments, demanding their schools divest from Israel and take a stance against genocide in Gaza. That also prompted university students in the UK and in Europe to join the calls for boycott, divestment and sanctions. Meanwhile, in Kenya, anger was brewing among young people who thought economic justice and an end to systemic corruption were long overdue. That anger eventually boiled over in demonstrations. And the voices from Kenya were so loud that some say they inspired the youth in Bangladesh in their quest that ended with the removal of the ruling class in place there for 15 years. We start today's episode looking back at the college anti-war encampments. And for that, we're joined by Mahmoud Thabata, a Harvard student and organizer with the Palestine Solidarity Committee, and Kendall Gardner, Doctor of Philosophy candidate at Oxford University, who also took part in the protest there. Thank you both so much for your time today. Mahmoud, if I could start with you. When you look back at these encampments, how successful would you say they were, not only in terms of putting pressure on universities to divulge their connections and divest, but also in terms of sending a message to the world?
Yeah, so I think that these encampments had so many functions and they were successful in just numerous ways. I mean, the first one is that they truly popularized the Palestinian struggle on our campus. It was a time where no one on campus could not think about Palestine. It reemerged and into everyone's mindsets, but it also showed an example that we should always be centering the genocide in Gaza into our demands, and it really helped provide such strong strength in having that mindset. But also, and everyone on campus in our organizing spaces agree, the encampment was a utility to achieve divestment. Just because several campuses decamped or had police shut down their encampments did not mean the movement for divestment ended. The encampment was just one strategy to get us closer to our demands, and has been proven successful. Since the encampment happened on our campus, we've seen such high repression, with 30 students being on probation, 5 students being suspended, and 13 degrees being withheld from seniors. And we had a commencement walkout of over 1,000 people, which helped reverse these disciplinary sanctions. And after the encampment, we have been seeing a surge in protests in solidarity with Gaza. I mean, we have our encampment called the Harvard Liberated Zone, but we soon realized that the liberated zone is everywhere on campus, no matter if there are tents or if they're not tents.
And precisely on that point, because many people across the world were expecting these encampments to actually resume once students went back to university. And Kendall, that was not the case. Could you share with us what the atmosphere is like on campus today?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say that the atmosphere is incredibly disappointed and enraged at the University of Oxford's continued complicity in the Zionist genocide in Gaza, especially as we've seen this genocide expand across the region. We know that divestment from Zionism goes against the very heart of a colonial institution like Oxford. And that's exactly the reason why our strategies have to be informed by longevity and durability. As Mahmoud just said, the encampment is a tool in a toolkit. And we've actually seen in this new year that Oxford Action for Palestine has only continued to grow and get stronger. We similarly held disruptions at graduation just this past weekend. Students were holding up Palestinian flags, and Oxford Action for Palestine actually held disruptions of the matriculation ceremony at the very beginning of the year. New students disrupted the ceremony and interrupted the speeches by the Vice Chancellor, Irene Tracy, calling out her complicity in the genocide. So even though the encampment itself might be over, the actions of Oxford Action for Palestine continue continue, especially because at a certain point, we realized that the encampment was no longer disrupting the functions of the university as usual. And our role is to disrupt business as usual. So to do that, we needed to come up with new and creative and innovative ways to maintain our strategy and continue its pressure on the university.
And Mahmoud, since we last spoke to you, a small event occurred in the US, the election of Donald Trump. How are students looking at that? And what is the atmosphere where you are when it comes to that particular political context?
Well, students have understood, as they see with the Biden administration, that both parties are complicit in a genocide. Lots of students on campus are very worried of a Trump presidency for the main fact that they don't know what a Trump presidency will look like in America with the second term, with aspects such as deportations or increased repression on student movements or reproductive rights at jeopardy. However, this mindset has really shown that students are caring for themselves through grassroots methods. Students on campus are looking at resources to keep themselves safe, but also redirecting their efforts to protest and to collectivize themselves into a student movement once again. I mean, we have seen a new action such as study-ins take a large wave on our campus, where we've had over 150 students going to libraries, studying with wearing a keffiyeh and having just a blank sheet of paper over their laptops, and just studying while having messages calling for divestment. And administration will come in and they will ID students and faculty, and they have suspended over 100 students and faculty from our libraries temporarily, including me. So you have seen that people have really called out this facade of such a maintenance of morality on campuses, but also inside the United States electoral system and the political system, where we're seeing that these parties and these institutions do not really represent who we are. And that is why the youth in our country today are taking to a grassroots movement to try to reemerge the progressive ideology that we really want to see, to really defend everyone within this country, defend everyone abroad, where we're seeing genocide being escalated in Gaza by the minute.
Obviously, the U.S. politics, what happens in U.S. politics has so much implications in the rest of the world. Kendall, 2024 was a year that saw so many young people at the forefront of different movements in different ways. We're going to talk a little bit more about them in the rest of the show. But does that bring you hope that young people today are actually more engaged, more aware, perhaps more educated and more determined to fight for a better future?
Yeah, of course it brings me hope. And hope is a discipline, one that is sometimes really difficult to practice. But I think that, especially in the West, we have the duty and responsibility to practice and to maintain longevity. But I think what this year really showed me, actually, and I'm really excited to hear from our comrades from Bangladesh and Kenya, is that Western student movements have a lot to learn from the way that politics plays out in the global South, specifically the role of students in global political movements for national liberation. I think that although the encampments were an incredible organizing strategy and movement, there's been a bit of undue attention placed on the encampments and on student organizers, sometimes at the expense of the very people struggling for their own liberation. I always try to remember and to really maintain the focus that students are not the ones fighting for the liberation of Palestine. That fight is coming from Palestine and from the Palestinian resistance. And it is our duty as students in the West to, one, always maintain that focus, and two, to try to lessen the extent to which our institutions and governments are complicit in this oppression. What we are struggling for are fundamentally the calls of the BDS movement, which is started from Palestine. And that movement is to lessen the extent to which our institutions are oppressing Palestinians in Gaza, historic Palestine, West Bank. And it's really important to take stock of the way that movements outside of the West have very different material realities. These struggles have different levers. They have different engagements with the political class in their own country. And we really need to remember that we are acting in solidarity, but we are not the ones on the front lines of this fight.
Kendall and Mahmoud, thank you both so much for your time. Thank you for being part of the stream today. And as we mentioned before, while young people fought for different causes and focused on different methods, their struggle was interconnected. While those encampments were still going on, we saw Kenya erupt in a fight for a more just future. Obra was our eyes on the ground.
Nairobi. I moved to this city more than 15 years ago. Since then, this city has housed me, fed me, made me. I have seen Nairobi in its glorious light, and I have seen its darkness. Tuesday, 25th June, 2024. I knew nothing about the darkness I was about to witness. History was being made by a generation calling for better governance. But with it came destruction, death. My name is Brian Obra. I'm a filmmaker. I walked and ran through these streets, making sure the sacrifice of those we lost would never be forgotten. I was here as the protesters charged through this street and this street. And the police, they held this street. With numbers uneven, the uniforms were pushed back. I was here as medics tended to the wounded inside this church ground. It was also here that a law enforcement officer made a promise that more people will die that day. I was here when the battle reached its peak. On one side, protesters had broken into the parliament building. On the other side, a promise was being fulfilled. I was here when the future of this country was being shaped in blood, fire, tears, darkness. I know the light is coming, and for as long as I'm here, may film be my contribution towards a better society.
And for a closer look at where things stand now, social justice activist and scholar Wanjiru is back with us today. Wanjiru, thank you so much for your time. What seems like an initial win for young people in Kenya has now backtracked. How are young people feeling about the fact that so many of those proposals that were part of the controversial finance bill that brought people to the streets in the first place are now going to be instated anyway, despite everything that's happened?
Thank you for having me once again. I think for us as young people, and actually the people of Kenya, it's a gross violation of our sovereignty. But the implementation of such draconian laws only hardens the resolve of the people of Kenya. And now we have the entire populace joining the call for the Gen Zs that Ruto must go. It has dominated not only the informal settlements of Nairobi, but also public spaces, like the recent concert in London by Ben. It was Ruto must go everywhere, everywhere. So the protests might have died down, but the resistance stays on. In fact, now we have more people who are on the mentality and on the same book that Ruto indeed must go, because things have gotten a lot worse than they were when we were coming out to protest against the finance bill. Also, the interference of domestic matters by IMF and World Bank are glaring now to majority of the Kenyan people.
Obviously, no, I just want to interrupt you for a second, because obviously this has been a very tense chapter in your recent history. I mean, there were people that were killed in the streets. According to Human Rights Watch, actually, Kenyan security forces abducted, arbitrarily arrested, tortured and killed perceived leaders of the anti-finance bill protest. President Ruto denies that this has happened. He's actually asked for families who are missing loved ones to come forward because he doesn't know any of the names that are missing. Can I ask you about the atmosphere of fear? Are you worried or do you feel safe in Kenya today?
I don't think anyone is safe in Kenya today. The recent abductions that have been going on, even Boniface Mwangi, who I was with on the other Al Jazeera interview, was recently abducted from his house in the morning. So there's that, but also the people have to feel safe in their own country. This is our home, and one person cannot take away our peace, cannot instill fear on 65 million of us. So we are still consolidating our constituency by ourselves. We are organizing through people's assembly to state that Kenya is home, Kenya ni nyumbani. We are saying it in Swahili, that Kenya ni nyumbani. We are still organizing people's assemblies to say that we must not allow a dictatorship again in Kenya. We have had a dictatorship for 24 years under the second president of Kenya. We are seeing the current president going towards that direction. And the people must come together and really defend their sovereignty and resist this. But we can only do this if we organize ourselves. So
but how do you go about, how do you go about organizing yourselves in this context, Wanjira? Because as we said, it can be dangerous. So where do you think this movement will go from here? How do you see the future of this anger and this resentment?
Luckily, we have the 2010 Constitution, which gives us rights that nobody can take away from us. And we are also challenging court through our lawyers who have been in absolute solidarity with us and our cause. We are organizing through local people's assemblies, through ecological justice centers. We are actually here in Mathare occupying the land that the government demolished our houses from. We are occupying and creating our employment ourselves, building community parks and gardens. But we are also having ecological reggae sessions where we come together as Gen Zs from different areas and listen to reggae music, talk about the politics that affect us, conscious reggae music, and moving around to the various neighborhoods. So when I say we are consolidating from the ground up, we are actually looking to change the system come 2027. We want to have a total system overhaul. And we understand we cannot do that without proper, serious organization. So we're coming together from Mathare, Dandora, Kayole, everywhere where we are having informal settlements and organizing from that local base.
You said before,
from the ground up.
You said before that all sectors of society have now joined the calls by Gen Z. Gen Z has been at the forefront of this movement, but also other movements that we've been talking about here on this episode. How hopeful are you when it comes to this generation? Do you think that they are more involved than ever in the causes that are dear to them? Do you think that they are determined to fight for a different future?
Yes, of course. And I'm very hopeful. And change, as I have said before, is inevitable. Change really is in the wind. We can feel it, we can see it. It feels like the darkest hour before dawn. It feels like that time things get really bad before they get really good. And now everybody, I think, who's conscious can see that these are times of change, and they are putting in whatever little effort they can to bring that much needed change. And this is not just here in Kenya, but everywhere. I see even the youth in Mozambique have risen to defend the sovereignty of the people of Mozambique. I see people are standing up for Palestine like never before. Solidarity across the globe is growing. There's this very deep desire to realize a new world where human rights are non-negotiable, where dignity really is a birthright for each and every human being, really. So I'm hopeful. And as we said, Kenya will never be the same again. These are the last kicks of a dying horse. We are organizing and consolidating to birth a new country where dignity and social justice is a given for every citizen.
Wanjiru, thank you so much for being back on the stream again. And when it comes to bringing about concrete change, very few have achieved what the youth in Bangladesh managed to deliver this past year. Prapti Taposhi, a student at Gardner University, joined us to talk about the end of an era and the start of a new one. Prapti, we saw multiple movements led by young people in 2024. We saw the encampments in the US that then spread across Europe. We saw people in Kenya demonstrating against corruption and bad governance. Would you say young people in Bangladesh were watching and drawing inspiration from these movements?
Obviously, with the students of Bangladesh, we took every track of them. We were watching them. We were watching how the police, arrested them and how they were taken away, how the students got harassed and everything, and as well as Kenya. So I believe with the students all around the world, all of our struggle, all of our fight against injustices and, discriminations, all are interconnected. All we feel is solidarity with one another, because together, stronger we can eradicate all the injustices and discrimination from the world.
And you definitely showed that in Bangladesh. I mean, you showed that young people can achieve monumental changes. And I want to ask you about those changes, because many young people in Bangladesh were very hopeful. Last time we spoke to you, you said you were very hopeful about the interim government and what that could bring. How enthusiastic do you remain today that young people are having their voices heard, that they are participating in the change they want to see?
We are hopeful because this is our government. We are the one who put the government in power, but the government need to focus on real issues. They need to stop, pleasing the masses. They need to stop just becoming a populist government, and they need to focus on the real issues there. The way the government's worker, the way the people who live under the poverty line in Bangladesh, they are still suffering right now. They're still facing attacks from police and other law enforcement agencies. We want the government to focus on real issues, to focus all of the people, all of the population of Bangladesh, so that the way we stood against injustices, the way we stood against fascism, we stood against discrimination. We want our interim government to at least do something, to do the actions that we can see that, okay, the changes, I know that the changes, it will take a lot of time, it will take a lot of patience, but we want a proper action, so that the way we put our hearts and hope into the interim government, we can establish that in the long run as well.
I do sense a little bit of anxiety here, perhaps a lack of patience in your voice. What do you hope for Bangladesh in 2025? As you said yourself, the government will need more time to actually put together some of the reforms that are much needed to actually deliver something new. How much time can you give them? And what do you hope this government will actually achieve in the long run?
First of all, yes, I am a bit anxious, and all of us, we the student leaders, the student protesters, we are being hopeful and being as anxious as well, because when we are ready to give the time the interim government need as the time they need, because the reformation of our country, the reformation of the structure, it's a very tough process, and the process needs a lot of time. If you ask me what I hope in for Bangladesh, obviously we the students, we hope at 2025 that at least we will be able to a proper democratic culture to establish it, to at least do the roadmap of it, so that we can get a proper democratic culture, not the authoritarian and the fascism we have seen in over a few years. And obviously, we want the rule of law and order to function properly in our country. And obviously, so that people are free from all the violences, people are free from the tagging culture, people are free from the mob lynching, and the people, the women, the minorities in the hill tracts, the garments worker, the people who live under the poverty, below the poverty line, so that they can live a basic livelihood. They can, they can express their rights, they can function with proper basic rights as well.
I would like to thank Prapti, but also Wanjira, Mahmoud, and Kendall for being part of the show today. And thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget, there is much more to come here on the stream. If you want to be part of our coverage, please send us your questions and suggestions using the hashtag or the handle AJStream. Take care, and I'll see you soon.